Welcome to Practising as a Physiotherapist in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Ko waiaho, he uri o Ngāti Awa, ko Maarama Davis toko ingoa. I'm a physiotherapist. I work at Te Ora Tinana o Aotearoa as a professional advisor, and I am a member of Tae Ora Tinana as well, which is one of our associations for Māori physiotherapists. Kia ora.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou, kua iau, he uri ahau no Waitangi Ngāti Parau me Ngāti Rangi Nui, nō putaru ahau, ko Witana Petley tōku ingoa, engari ko Tana ahau. Kia ora, I'm Tana, I am the tumuaki of Tae Ora Tinana, but I wear a lot of different pōtai around Haura Māori and I guess teaching Haura Māori things. Nā ka mihi.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Also, today we're going to be looking at Level 1 Introduction into the requirements when you're coming into Aotearoa to practice as a physiotherapist. We're coming from the angle of being physiotherapists, and we're really excited to take you through some sections today that will be really useful when you're working in Aotearoa. So looking at the differences between the Tiriti of Waitangi and the Treaty of Waitangi. So Witana, how can we look at that and have a bit of a discussion of those differences historically, and then we can move into what it looks like contemporarily? Yeah,
well, the main differences between the Treaty of Waitangi and Te Tiriti of Waitangi, and why we kind of refer to them as two different documents, is because one was written specifically in Te Reo Māori, the other one written in English, and they have slightly different meanings. But one of the key differences is that there was a lot of signatures on the Te Reo Māori version by a lot of chiefs around Aotearoa, and a much smaller number signing the English version. And it's
a sign of when where we were at as a developing country, that there are actually more Māori, more tangata whenua in the land than there were tau iwi non-Māori. So that power shift has come along the way, and the misunderstandings and the fear of what that meant and being educated through with the treaty has become to the fore. So we're at a time now to talk about what does that mean in terms of not only those 3 articles, but also the 5 principles that have been identified in Y2575. I'd like to just expand on that a little bit more in terms of not going into the treaty itself and the treaty, but where does that sit in terms of, the responsibilities those treaties had as founding documents in terms of hauora Māori health.
Yeah, well, the signing of Te Tiriti bound us in a partnership. So Aotearoa and the Crown bound in a mutually beneficial partnership. Well, that was the aim and intention. How that relates to, I guess, as we talk about Haura Māori now, so one of the things that unfortunately happened over time was that perspectives of health and views of health from a Māori worldview were kind of pushed to the side, and I guess a contemporary view of health that was based on British colonial society was the foundation of our health system, really. So what we're talking about when we talk about Haura Māori is, one, the health and well-being of Māori populations, Māori whānau, but also the view of health and what that really looks like from a deeply Te Ao Māori point of view, which is slightly different and has some specific details when it's compared to other views of health.
Thank you. So historically, we've come from a really medical-centric approach in terms of how we deliver our services as physiotherapists, and we've evolved and becoming more contemporary and actually circling back around into holistic approach, which really fits well with me in terms of our thinking hauora Māori.
Well, hauora Māori and holistic views of health, like you said, they marry up really nicely together. Specifically because when we're looking at health from a Māori world point of view, it's how everything kind of relates together. So that holistic model of health is looking at all of the relationships and how it really ties out to the wider environment. And so when we're looking at the previous views, or like maybe we weren't looking at how it relates to everything. So the holistic view of health and the relationships and the strength of those relationships, and how they tie in, really give way to, I guess, sustainable changes.
Kia ora tērā. I also want to grab onto this opportunity to talk about Māori, and to say and to acknowledge that not all Māori are the same. We're really coming from a iwi hapu group, which in some areas, if you're coming into this country, that you're thinking tribal or village-like. And that's where we are different amongst Māori. Like we are different amongst my Scottish roots, my French roots. We are different. So, yeah, it's just bearing that in mind, that one approach will not fit everyone.
I mean, additionally on that, deeper layer to that is also just the experience in Te Ao Māori. So we have our differences from hapu and iwi, but I guess our lived experience of being in Te Ao Māori is also changes that variability a little bit, which I think adds a little more exciting space to kind of find out more about people.
Absolutely, and this is where it ties into what we were talking about previously, I believe, about Te Tiriti o Waitangi, looking at those articles and the principles and making it living, that we've read about it, we're thinking contemporary thoughts, how can we apply this to not only for Māori, because that relationship and that treaty signing was for Māori and our tauiwi, so our non-Māori. So it's like what you said at the very beginning, it's a mutual understanding and respect, with the focus on as well for our Indigenous tangata whenua Māori. This is a really neat point to be able to segue onto, looking at cultural competency, and I'm going to look down and versus cultural safety. We can talk about it big, but then focus down into how do we apply that as physiotherapists in our space of working in Aotearoa. What's your thoughts?
Well, a couple of definitions. So the cultural competency definition that I use is just the skills and attributes that clinicians have that relate to, I guess, cultural knowledge of another group or groups that we're working with. The cultural safety side of things is how do we utilise those skills and get clear direction from the people we're working with. So it's more about using our skills, but sharing the power to how we kind of go down this health route with our whānau who are coming to our services.
We've had this really neat conversation over the years, Witana and myself, talking about that shift in the power within the conversations, actually looking at those skills that we bring in as physiotherapists to meet the level of being competent. That's from my perspective, and also the regulator's perspective, that I'm competent. But by asking that person that we're delivering that service to, and in terms of the cultural competence, cultural safety rather, is from their perspective. Now, I just want to ask you this question, because I have my thoughts. Is that only in the clinicianal space, if that's such a word? Or should we be thinking, we work not just with patients and kiritaki, how does that work in the context that you and I are working in? First, what I'm talking about is that general, the cultural competence and safety.
Yeah, ki oku whakaaro. That when we really try and explore what cultural safety is, it moves us well outside of any confined space. We provide cultural safety in our everyday lives for a lot of people, and it's one of these things that we have a lot of skills to provide that already. So when we talk about cultural safety, a lot of the examples are in the clinical space. But really you can provide cultural safety to anyone who's coming into your home. We know how to adjust, or if you're entering someone else's home, you know how to adjust to find where, one, you can utilise your skills, utilise your knowledge and conversation, and how you can mutually work together. that's essentially what cultural safety is. In the clinical sense, a couple of examples that I like talking about. So when it comes to culture, it's about how we're interacting with each other. And for physios, I had a couple of physio mates who are golfers. Love golf. I'm not a big fan of it right now, but I'm sure I'll age into it quite soon. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, actually.
Absolutely, yeah. Age is a culture too.
And then when they have, say, a patient come in with lower back pain, but they find that mutual understanding, they're a big golfer as well. So the language changes already. They maybe start using golfing analogies to really help this person or whānau understand the limits of their function and what kind of pathway we're looking forward to get to that, that thriving and healthy stage. And there's multiple accounts of that. There's a lot of different language use depending on if we're working physio space compared to non-physio spaces. If we're from Wellington compared to Dunedin, where I came up from, we're slightly different, but we know how to work those same skills.
That's a really good example because it's a non-frightening and threatening example, talking about golf rather than talking about ethnic identifiers and the colour of your skin. Also noting, well, you didn't say that, but I'd like to note that it's okay to make a mistake.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid
100%.
to make a mistake, because you will make mistakes. We all make mistakes. And being prepared, as we are as physiotherapists, to go, oh gosh, apologies. I'm going to learn from what your perspective is, because that's going to improve your outcomes, but also improve my delivery, which I think is where we work, what we were talking about before. It's part of the power shifting. There's the words of power dynamics, but those sands, what I think of sands, of the shift of power, it's not always going to be held by one particular person or organisation. Sometimes organisations hold a lot of power, and hopefully that does shift.
So, kind of to summarise, like, one of the awesome whakaaro I've heard in the past is that when we look at cultural competency, it's kind of our bottom line. So, to not make the absolute worst mistakes, or maybe want to produce those negative experiences for particular groups, particular people. The cultural safety side is giving yourself permission we're working towards our highest standard. How do we provide a scope to utilise all of our skills in a culturally safe way? We need to kind of make those small mistakes along the way. But if you meet that competency point, you can kind of have this assurance that if you're clear on what those competency thresholds are, then you won't make the absolute worst mistakes, and you can have some safety in that. Any learning space, especially around cultural safety, we need those mistakes to kind of progress us forward. But also the support to kind of, once we make that mistake, where's the next point to help us improve it for next time?
We were having this discussion before, and this is something that again, it's a really neat kōrero, I believe, and it's, you reminded me just now talking about negative experiences and negative learning. And sometimes you're going to come across people that are negative in terms of your own learnings, and you're thinking you're in a safe environment. I've moved the shift on to not individual but like organisational safety, which comes under culture, which is an organisation, and feeling that you are in a safe place to make mistakes, because that's what we do when we learn. If you're in an environment where it's not safe, I suppose those are the questions which you can have a look at some of our standards, which we're going to talk about later, on how to navigate and work your way through some situations, who to talk to, how to, how, like what I just said, how to navigate around it, because you are going to be confronted and be confronted.
Yeah, and it's just about, if you don't have that safe network or safe place immediately in your vicinity, there's like the standards you're going to talk about, but there's also a lot of groups out there, especially in the physio sector. I really think like a lot of our physio we're very much supportive of development, whether we know exactly how to provide that information for you immediately. If we don't, we know someone who can. And so we're really trying to, I guess, bring up everyone's ability to learn that stuff.
Kia ora. So from cultural competence and cultural safety, we have within our regulation our practice thresholds and our physiotherapy standards framework. We've also have sitting underneath that is secondary legislation, is meeting the requirements of particular standards. We have 2 standards, and I'm not going to rate them in any particular order. The first one I'm going to talk about is He Kawa Whakaruruho a Mātatou Māori, Māori Cultural Competence and Māori Cultural Safety Standard. And we've got some examples through that which it's through the guidance tool that is associated with this particular standard that we've worked together on that. And, do you want to talk a little bit about how you can utilise that guidance tool to be able to meet the requirements of the standard?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of examples on how you can meet each particular point of the standard. One of the things that I used was just a critical reflection on how I'm engaging with Māori whānau. Myself being Māori, but not necessarily growing up down in Dunedin where I'm based. I really had to understand, am I working as best I can with the whānau who are down there, or is something needing to be improved? And that's one of the things that I was able to do quite nicely because of it.
Kia ora. Also, we've got on that tool, there are some resources, and some of those resources can be accessed through Tae Ora Tinana, the Physiotherapy New Zealand site. There are other sites as well. I know, Witana, that you've been involved in your role within producing and doing some of these resources. Can you just talk a little bit about that in terms of how this could be utilised?
Yeah, well, one of the courses that we've just created is the Cultural Capability Program that we run through Tae Ora Tinana, which is a 6-week short course that explores critical conversations around Haora Māori and the physio sector and all of the nice little details within it. So that's a 6-week course that anyone can come and do with us.
Kia ora. So I think spend some time having a look at that particular standard. Use it at the same time alongside the guidance tool, but also have a look at the same time with the cultural competence standard, because they should be read together. They do intertwine. There are resources for those that are being developed, and just have a look at those. And if you've got any further questions or any queries, please don't hesitate to contact us here at Physiotherapy Board of New Zealand. Te Puari, Taki Tinana, o Te Aotearoa. Kia ora.
Kia ora.